Hi, everybody. It's Lynn Hillix, your host for this radio show. And today we're talking about addiction, loss, death, and what's on the other side. And although it's a really sad and incredibly, challenging and tragic situation, there is something on the other side. And I want this show to be about hope and healing. And I have asked my sister, Lynn Hillix, who has lost her only son at the age of 42 to a heroin overdose, to be here and talk about the painful experiences that they have been through. And I will share too, as the aunt of a guy who died of heroin overdose and the mother of a young woman who's struggled with it for so long and who now is in recovery. So let's say hi, just real quickly, just say hi.
Hi, it's Lynn.
Okay, and I want to just talk for a minute about, a little bit of a history. I know anybody listening to this show, anybody who's attracted to listening to this show probably already knows this, but I was shocked to reread these numbers that from 1999 to 2017, more than 700,000 people have died of drug overdose, and 400,000 of those is due to opiate addiction and opiate overdoses. In 2017, almost 70% of drug overdoses were from opiates. And in 2017, the death from opiates of all kinds was 6 times higher than it was in 1999. So it's just become so outrageously prevalent, and it's so sad. On the average, 130 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. And one of the things that I was interested in was the history of what happened between 99 and 2017. The first wave began in the 1990s with an increased prescribing of opiates, increasing even more after 1999. And the second wave came with a rapid increase in heroin use and heroin deaths. And I was talking to Lynn about this before the show, and she was saying it's probably because that heroin is so much cheaper than getting prescription opiates. So that second wave came, in 2010 with a rapid increase in heroin use. And then the third wave came in 2013 with an increase in deaths from illicitly manufactured synthetic opiates like fentanyl. So that's where we are. And, we're going to be talking today about what comes after. We're going to go through the process of talking about the death and the struggles of addiction and the treatment and all of that. And then we're going to be talking about the hope and healing on the other side. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this show is because not just the incredibly painful emotional toll that it takes on the addict who is suffering through it and hopefully recovering, but also the toll on the family and friends. And, we'll get into more of this, but, family often blames themselves and they feel the loss and the disappointment about the relationship even long before they died. As soon as they start using, you are experiencing their loss and many other negative painful side effects, financial instability for the addict and the family, getting into incredible denial, which was my issue and enabling. Sometimes people get angry and blame and avoid each other. There are just so many different ways that it can go. So without further ado, I'd like you to tell us your story and Chad's story, Lynn, in your own words. And, when did it start and what did his addiction look like over the years? And thank you again for being willing to bare your heart and soul in sharing this with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's my least favorite story.
I bet.
But also the story of my life with my son. He probably started using drugs when he was 12 or 13 years old and went to, many different treatment programs. The first one for 30 days. The next one, he went to a treatment program in Hawaii for 9 months.
This is when he was how old?
15 and 16. And, I don't know what to say about it. Lots of pain, lots of lies, lots of periods of relief when he was actually in jail. Those were the times when, I felt the most relief from his addiction. He did have a long period of sobriety, or at least I thought so, between 27 and about 36. And that was pretty blissful. But, I'm thinking there might have been some denial in that period of time too. Eventually he slipped back into use. And when he died of an overdose at 42, I had been, I have to say, blissfully unaware that he was using. And I'm kind of grateful for my denial at that time.
I want to say something about that, because I too was, I wouldn't say blissfully unaware, but I guess so, unaware that Rebecca was using at the end for the last, year or year and a half when she was actually living with us. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think people think about that and they think, how could you possibly not know? Well, the first reason, of course, is we don't want to know. We don't want to face the pain that comes along with knowing that our child is using heroin or using heroin again or whatever. And, and I think that we are so uneducated about what people are capable of, even when using heroin. For instance, Rebecca had a full-time job that she drove an hour and a half to get to. And Chad, had a business, a tattoo business. I mean, people keep jobs when they're on heroin, if under certain circumstances. I mean, I know that sometimes they're just completely strung out and incapable of doing so. But I think that we have this idea that a heroin addict is somebody who is completely dysfunctional and incapable of acting normal or doing some kinds of normal things. And so that contributes greatly to us being in denial.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Chad was running a tattoo business. He was financially independent. And on the surface, he looked like he was doing well. Underneath that, there were, things that I look back on and I go, duh. It's pretty obvious now that he was using. But I didn't want to know. It would mean, disconnection from him. It would mean that I would have to disrupt his relationship with his daughter. It would mean that I would have to face the emotions of his ex-wife. And I didn't want to do any of that. So I just stuck my head in the sand.
Yeah, I am that. I mean, it's just so easy to do. And I know that many people who are listening to this podcast right now are saying, yeah, me too. Or you're saying, I wonder if my kid is, and I don't want to be seeing it. And, if you're wondering if your kid is, and you don't want to see it, then take a pause, get some support, and, give them a drug test. Face the reality, because it certainly isn't going to help anything to not face it. So, the story that I hear you saying, and, I was his aunt, but most of the time lived in a different state while he was going through a lot of this. And I remember talking to him at certain times, and, but I never really had a handle on what was happening with Chad. And I tried to help him a couple of times, letting him stay at our house while he was trying to get sober one time and, make some efforts. But I also didn't want to get involved. It was painful, and I wanted to avoid the pain of that. So, I have regret that I didn't offer to do more. I was working at a treatment center back in the days, I guess, when he was 27.
Yes.
And
that you got him into.
Yeah, that my boss, Mary Joyce, said, how about if we give a scholarship to your nephew? And I said, no, I don't want him anywhere near me. And she said, just think about it, Helen, what it would be like if he got clean. And that just touched my heart. And of course, I couldn't say no after that. And he did come to that treatment program, and he stayed, I don't know, 6 months or 3 months?
Yeah, 6 months.
6 months. It was
maybe just 3 months. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a great program. It was called Pomero. I don't think it's in existence anymore, but I want to put a plug in for long-term programs because, one of the things that I think is so ineffective about our drug treatment system is that, we at Pomero, we used to call it spin dry programs. Now, Rebecca's last program was 30 days and it worked. But for so many people, that is just a drop in the bucket to helping people change this lifetime of habit. And by this time, when Chad was 27, he had been using, as you were saying, for 15 years already. And he'd been to several other treatment programs and he'd been trying to get clean, in and out of jail, all of that for years.
Yes.
And so, giving somebody the opportunity to get that kind of structured support and safety, that safe kind of environment for 6 months or more is so advantageous in breaking the habit. And I know that it's very costly, but damn, it must be costing our government. That's a statistic I did not look up, but it's got to be costing our government millions and millions and billions actually of dollars in lost income and in the justice system where they don't belong at all, and in all of the health problems and all of those things for not treating addictions properly. So I don't know. I love the social model I think Portugal has, where they make communities for people. And that's what we need. Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and some of the other 12-step programs are an amazing support, but they don't provide residential care. So,
well, and of course, we have terrible, terrible fear in our society of the drug addict. There's somebody that lives on the street that will murder you for money, that will, rape you and kill you and do whatever it takes to get drugs. They're not people with jobs that are out there just trying to subsist. They are the devil. And so I think that until we can realize and see who the addict is, our country's not going to want to support them.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up. And, it's time that we stopped separating all the different categories of addiction. I've struggled with food addiction my whole life, as has Lynn, and but it's like, and people are very prejudiced against that. If you are heavy, it's like you are undesirable. But we have work addiction, we have pornography addiction is just rampant in our society. Gambling. There are so many kinds of addiction, and I guess the thing that I'm so glad you brought that up, because we are that. We are all addicts. We're addicted to our damn telephones. We're addicted to social media, to Instagram. We're addicted to TV and Netflix and Hulu. And, we're addicted to sex. We're addicted to makeup. We're addicted to Botox. I mean, we could go on and on and on about the things that we use to deal with our emotions. And that's what I'd like you to talk about next, Lynn, because I think this is the part that makes people so terrified of facing their kids and dealing with their kids, is that they don't know what to do with the emotions that they have. And so, I'm not saying you did a perfect job, and I'm certainly not saying I did a perfect job, but what did you do after Chad died? What did you do to basically, to heal yourself and to make it through that horrible initial time?
So, of course, it makes me cry every time I think of that day, but
yeah, me too.
I had tremendous support from his friends and from our family. And, something in me knew that I would make it through. One day at a time, that I knew I was going to make it through. And I also had this kind of mantra in the back of my head of, this isn't the worst thing that could happen to you. You can live through this. People are always saying, oh, losing your child is the worst thing that can happen to you. But it is not. And, I got lots of support. I rejoined a spiritual community I had been part of. I went back to work immediately. There was a woman that I worked with who had lost her husband to violence, and I actually moved her into my office so that I could have the support of somebody who knew what I had been through. I did go to a support group for mothers who had lost their children, and that wasn't the right support group for me, but I did get lots of support through therapy and counseling and my spiritual group and family and people at work that supported me. So that's the answer: support, support, support. Don't isolate, don't wallow.
You said something to me a little bit earlier about that the grief group was not the right thing for you, but what did you get from that grief group?
The grief group I went to was in the Jenna Druck Center, and the man who established that had a daughter who died. And when I went to it the first time, he was the leader of the group, and he said, mothers whose children have died of a drug overdose have a different kind of grief than other mothers because their child started dying and going away from them when they started using drugs. So you have a very, very long period of grief. And in some ways, the death of a child like that is a relief because you don't have to be worrying about them all the time anymore. You don't have to worry about the next phone call or the next period in jail or anything. It's finally over. And in some way you are free.
Yeah, I was really struck by that. The characterization that you start losing your child as soon as they start being addicted. And so the grief is prolonged most of the time. Most kids don't die immediately. Usually it's a multi-year process, sometimes multi-decade process. So I really resonated with that. The loss that comes long before the person dies, the loss of that relationship, the disappointment of that relationship, and the hopes that you had for your child of being something or doing something or accomplishing something or being happy or whatever it is, getting married and having kids, whatever your dreams are for your kid, having grandchildren, whatever your dreams are, the disappointment, and Lynn was lucky enough that during that long phase of sobriety, she did get a grandchild.
Right.
And
that was very good. Thank you, Chad.
Exactly. And that's, I know, is also, even though you didn't mention it, I think that's part of what has helped you move on, is that part of him is still here with you.
Yeah.
And there is still a legacy from your son that you get to be part of.
Yes.
And that, that's got to be helpful.
Right. Yeah. Especially when you've only had one child, it
Right.
really helps to have that legacy go on.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about Lynn's story, is that he was her only child, as Rebecca is my only child. And of course, after Chad died, that very night that we went down there, Rebecca admitted that she was using heroin. I don't know how long that had been going on, but I guess we can segue. I want to say one more thing, though, about what Lynn shared about in the back of your mind, that you said this is not the worst thing that could happen to you. I was thinking the worst thing that could happen to you is that he keeps relapsing over and over and over again for 30 more years.
Right. When you feel like you are in, I don't know. People go to Al-Anon to break their addiction from, another person in their life. And I definitely had that with Chad. And, it would have been up to me to break that cycle for myself. But I had not done so at that time. But I'm not saying that there wouldn't have been hope for me to break my own cycle of codependence with him. and lead a very meaningful life with him continuing to be an addict. I'm not going to take that hope away from people or from myself. It's possible. People do it all the time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I'm so glad you mentioned Al-Anon, because it is certainly a tremendous support to people. And, you know, I have a new client, and her husband is an alcoholic drug addict. And I've only talked to her a couple of times, and I said, have you been to Al-Anon? And she said, I don't even know what it is. And I was completely shocked, because this woman has been to a number of other therapists, and they've never mentioned Al-Anon to her. And so I just want to really put a plug out there for anybody who's listening to this podcast to, use the 12-step programs, whether you're the suffering addict or you are the family member. Get your butt to Al-Anon. Oh my God. And just like Lynn said, it can support you to live a happy, fulfilled life, even if you have a using addict or alcoholic in your life. I'd like you to talk a little bit, Lynn, about your life today and how you manage it and how you feel on a daily basis and what you've been through. How many years has it been since Chad died?
So it's been 8 years. And of course, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of him multiple times. And I still have a hard time looking at pictures of him. I feel like in the past year, I have finally gotten to a place where I can celebrate his life a little bit and feel joy about having had him as my son. It was very useful in the beginning to be angry at him. And
I want to just stop there for just a second and have you say that again.
Yeah, it was very useful in the beginning to be angry at him, because it would have hurt so bad to miss him at that point. And it was very useful to me to hang on to the idea that it was a relief that he was gone. And anyway, it's a process, but anger's been the greatest friend of mine, and anger and relief. And I have to stay out of blaming myself for his death and blaming myself for his drug addiction. And my niece Rebecca has been very, very helpful in so many ways with that, because she's here to remind me that an addict, has certain ways of being that have nothing to do with how they were raised or how much you love them. But it's nice now to have, really good thoughts about him, and to miss him in a very sweet way.
That's so nice. And I can totally understand the part about being angry, because usually by the time an addict dies of an overdose, they've given us so many reasons to be pissed off. I mean, so many reasons, stolen from us, or, been abusive to us, or just caused us to worry, incessant worrying and all of that. So, I mean, I think that any listener listening to this podcast will resonate with that. And it's okay. It's okay to be angry at the dead person. I think in our culture, that has been kind of a taboo thing, that you're not supposed to be angry at the dead. Somehow we romanticize the dead, rather than saying, he was this kind of person, and he was that kind of person. A complicated kind of person, just like living people are. You don't become a saint just because you're dead. So I think that I want to encourage people to allow themselves to go through the full spectrum of emotions that are natural in the grieving process. And anger is certainly one of them in a situation like that. And I think it's also true that holding on to anger is not healthy forever either. There comes a time when we get to forgive that person for the pain that they've caused us, because this to me is a universal principle: is they were doing the best they could at the time. And even though that may have been a shitty way they were doing their life, it was the best they could at the time. And, we just have to own that, because, and the same thing applies to us. Even though I was in total denial of my daughter's use and maybe could have saved her some agony, I was doing the best I could at the time, just like she was. And this is something our culture does not seem to be very good at, is that kind of understanding and compassionate look at all sides of it, that even the parents who get angry and rejecting and they abandon their children when they need them, they're doing the best they can. Why are you shaking your head?
I was just thinking of, one of the things I was grateful for from the support group was that there was a woman there whose son was also an addict. And he had called home begging for her to give him a place to stay for the night because he didn't have any place. And she was angry and rejected him. And he went and slept under some structure that caved in and killed him.
Oh my God, what a horrible story.
I'm so grateful that that's not my story. And the horrible guilt that she felt because, she was doing the best she could at the time. She thought she was taking care of him by having him face the consequences of his actions.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because this, I think, is a very tricky thing in the life of a family of an addict, is when to help and when to say no. And honestly, I cannot say there is a right or wrong way to do it, or a right time or wrong time. You really have to use your support system to get as clear as you possibly can each individual time. Because I remember, saying no more. And then the next day it would be, yes, come home and I'll get you into treatment. I mean, it's like every day you have to go into your heart and pray and ask for guidance from people that are more neutral than you are, and get that support that you need. Because I have a client that I see just very rarely, every now and then, and it's like she's still buying alcohol for her son because she's terrified that if she doesn't buy it, that he will run away and that he'll die under a bridge. And he might.
Yeah.
And he might. And until she can manage the idea that he might die, she's not going to ever be able to say no to that. And of course, it's very sad, because there's the possibility that he could die, but there is also the possibility that he could get well.
Yes.
And neither one can happen as long as she's continuing to buy him alcohol. But that has to be something that each one of us as parents or friends or spouses or whatever grapples with themselves, that, if I say no and he dies, how will I feel tomorrow? And I had to face that as a mother. I had to face that over and over again. And the times that I said no, and I thought she could be dead tomorrow, I thought, I will be okay. I will be okay, because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And, I think everybody, again, listening to this podcast knows that just because you think it's the right thing to do does not mean it's going to turn out well.
I'm just thinking about when I got the phone call that he had died. In my head, I was thinking, this is how that feels. I have been wondering, for years, what will that moment be like? And it's like, and this moment is here now. I don't know why I'm bringing that up, but it was just weird to be thinking that. after hearing that news.
Well, it just shows, it goes back to what that person was saying at the grief group, that you've lost this person for 27 years in your case, or longer, 30 years. And, this is what it feels like when it's over. It's like you've been preparing for this time in your mind. You've been preparing for this moment for 30 years. And how could you not think, I wonder what that's going to feel like.
Right.
And I remember his girlfriend saying that night that, that she and Chad knew this was how it was going to end.
Right.
That she knew that one of these days she was going to come over and he would be dead. And she probably felt that same way. Okay, yeah. This is how that feels. It's finally here. I've walked into his apartment and he's dead.
Yes.
So I do not want to stop this segment of the podcast on that note, though. I want to hear you talking about what your life is like today, and, in a complete way, not to sugarcoat anything, but to talk about, do you have a fulfilling life now, and how do you manage it?
Before we started the podcast, Rebecca was saying, my intention today is to focus out. And so, I think that's definitely the key to a fulfilling life, is to focus out. I have an extremely fulfilling job as an oncology nurse for Kaiser. And so I focus out every day because that's my job. I'm so lucky to have that. I have an unbelievably supportive family. I love having Rebecca in my life as an example of a successful person in recovery. And I love sharing his memory with all of the people that knew him. And of course, my granddaughter is adorable. And I'm so happy that he had her. And of course, I worry almost every day that she will be an addict. But
maybe a few Al-Anon meetings are in our near future.
Right.
I think that would be a good idea. I also want to give a plug to you and to our whole family. I think one of the reasons that our family has come through intact, so to speak, is because we believe in doing transformational work. And we believe in therapy, and we believe in that there is a spiritual higher consciousness, whether you call that God or the universe or higher power or source, whatever you call it, we have that, all of those supports. We believe in tribe and community, and we don't judge each other. We understand what addiction is. We've gotten enough education over the years that we are compassionate about it when we see it cropping up in yet one more family member. And I want to say that because, not to toot our own horn, but to encourage people that it takes work. Otherwise, one of the reasons that you were saying about the grief group that didn't work for you was people get stuck in that grief.
Right.
And it becomes their new identity. My new identity is that I am the mother of a dead, overdosed child. That's it. And I'm never going to recover. I'm never going to get past it. And the sad thing about that is it ruins relationships, whether it's relationships with your family, with your co-workers, with your husband or wife. It can block your life from then on out. And in essence, you die along with your child. And that is something that to me is as big a tragedy as the loss of the life of the person. So please don't do that. If you're listening to this and you need help, call somebody, email me at hhillix@yahoo.com. I'd be happy to support you. There are many places. Go to Al-Anon, get the support you need, because there are so many great programs out there for transformation, and they don't even have to have anything to do with addiction per se. Lynn mentioned the innerrevolution.org. We also, all of us have gone through a leadership program called Ascension Leadership Academy. And it's like there are so many opportunities for transformation and for focusing out and for finding ways to move through your pain. There are so many wonderful ways of doing that. And don't give up on yourself and your life. And at some point, you will have even more to offer others, which I believe you do, Lynn. I believe you have even more to offer others because of what you've been through. And for me, I mean, I know that I have much more to offer my clients because I've been through all of this, and I don't have any judgment about it. And I just want to help people live as loving and full and rich and healed a life as possible. So life can be really, really painful, and life can continue to be incredibly joyful and healing and hopeful, even beyond loss and death. And we're going to sign off now, and I want all of you to share this out with people that you know can use it. I want you to follow me on Instagram at Helen Hillix, Hillix, and follow me also on my Facebook page, same name, Helen Hillix. So thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing that painful journey that you went on. And
Just for you, Helen.
I appreciate it. And, you know, that's why I asked Lynn, because not everybody's going to, you know, get that raw with you. So have a great day, everybody. And I love you, and I'll talk to you next week.